I'd like to talk a little bit about playing this game called Shock, which is by Joshua A.C. Newman. It was published in 2006. It's been through a couple of minor rewrites. Well, the only way to really explain this is to start just by pretending we're looking at a group of people, they're playing Shock. What do we see? And there's a lot of terminology in this game, so I'll be revisiting these later in a more explanatory way. But right now, let's just be descriptive. So during any particular point in play, there will be one protagonist character that we're focusing on. And so the person who plays that character is called the protagonist player at this moment. And you'll also see that another player is playing some character or entity who is personally opposed through understandable agency, is opposed to basically whatever this protagonist is ultimately trying to achieve. And so therefore the protagonist player is playing a character in a situation. And in fact, they even said what their character was doing and where they were. And the antagonist player is bringing to bear a great deal of opposition. Meanwhile, there's another person, perhaps somebody is what's also called the issue owner, the person who's in charge of an issue that this protagonist is kind of wrapped up in. So that person is also contributing with details, nuances. It's called minutiae of the issue. So the issue is a social issue that actually we probably recognize and at least know exists here and now in the world. And as if that weren't enough, then there is somebody called the shock owner. And so that shock owner is doing exactly the same thing as the issue owner, but in reference to this thing called the shock, which is the technological or at least futuristic big swerve that's been thrown at society and people. And so it's a wash in Game Masters, effectively. Now, the antagonist player is the one who is very Game Master-like in terms of opposition, in terms of adversity. But they may not necessarily have much situational control overall. After all, it was the protagonist player who named and where everything was going down this time. And the issue owner and shock owners are also contributing quite a bit. The issue owner specifically, because this issue is not going to be a central piece of the fiction, at least in terms of all of its intensity, except for this protagonist. Okay, so that's a lot going on, right? We've got this protagonist player, we've got this antagonist player, we've got the shock owner and the issue owner. Now, just to add the last crazy, everybody at the table is the owner of an issue. One of them is active at the moment, associated, or rather, the protagonist is associated with that issue. So when we check out this protagonist, that issue owner, really revs up. But all the issues, each one owned by a different person, can be thrown in as detail, color, supportive phenomena of different kinds. All such things are called minutiae, the word I used a minute ago. So although only one issue is kind of revved up, and that issue owner is really bringing everything they've got regarding that issue, while this protagonist is on the spot. But everyone else, they have their issues too, right? That's the protagonist owner, the antagonist owner, the shock owner. All these people have their own issue that they're just kind of coloring everything up with when and if it comes in. And when I say owner, this is important. Let's say I'm playing the issue owner for this scene, right? And so I'm like bringing it hardcore. I mean, maybe it's ethnic cleansing or something like that. And so it's all about, these ethnic cleansing issues as they have been shocked by the technological thing. And I am just bringing in all the details, all of the content. Now, everybody else at the table can be tossing in their various minutiae for their issues too. But what if I come up with something about one of those? It's cool, I can. It's just that issue owner kind of has the rubber stamp or can toss in what they want, but can also sort of approve or modulate what I want to do with their issue stuff. So we can all have a little bit of a hand in each other's, candy bowl, but the bowls are owned. Okay, so that should give you the idea. It's pretty rich in terms of input. Everybody there can. By the way, what if you are none of these people? What if there's more people at the table and for other reasons too, you're not the protagonist player this time, you're not the antagonist player this time, you're not the issue owner, and you're not the shock owner. Well, guess what? You still have the issue that you own. And so your contribution of the minutiae and your authority over that issue's minutiae as used by anyone else, those are all still present. So everybody's playing. There's one effectively, and we'll talk about nuances later, but effectively there's one protagonist operative at the moment. So everybody else is kind of different kinds of a game master at that time. If you look at the diagram, it says what I just said. You'll see the protagonist player not only plays the protagonist as their opening situation, continues to play the protagonist during the scene, but also is in charge of their issues minutiae. Someone else, down there, the issue owner, they're in charge of their issues minutiae. Notice that what's asterisked. It so happens that you will never play a protagonist for an issue that you own. There will be you and the issue owner and the antagonist player. So there's at least 3 people in that situation. So those are the ones that I have asterisked. But you will notice that the protagonist player's issue and the antagonist player's issue, particularly the protagonist player's issue, is not going to be involved as adversity. They have to kind of be a GM about that stuff while they're playing their protagonist. So maybe that's a little confusing at the moment. Just bear in mind, everybody is GMing regarding the issue. One of those people is got the issue turned up to 11. Another one's playing a protagonist dealing with how that issue is shocked by the science fiction stuff. Okay, there's my diagram. Notice that everybody's accounted for. Now we're going to talk about how this gets set up, because different ways to arrange the people and the characters results in some very interesting different conformations of these authorities. So what am I saying here? We should probably consider 5 people. Let's just make it up. You can play with as few as 2. You can play with a lot more than 5. Let's say 5. So the first thing is that we make up a shock, and it's usually one person says the shock. Best practice, don't have a freaking debate and, discuss alternate shocks. Huge pain in the ass, completely unnecessary. Someone says a shock, artificial brains, whatever, name it. Aliens live among us. Could be as basic as you want or as out there, original, if you will, if you want. Doesn't matter. So we have a shock. And we then have all of us, every single person, will state an issue, a social issue. Like I said, ethnic cleansing a bit ago, all sorts of possible examples. You could say conscription. You could say you know, labor disputes. You could say breakdown of democracy. I mean, you could say who knows what that is important to you as a social issue, in the sense that it seems cool, to get shocked by that shock. You don't have to say why or how or anything. In fact, you don't have to say anything about any of these things except just the terminology of what they are. No explaining. And the reason for that is the people who state the shock, the person who states the shock, and the people, including that person, who each state an issue. One shock, 5 issues at this point. None of those have to be the owner of those things. Now we claim ownership. Somebody says, I want to own the shock. And for every single issue, somebody's going to own it. Does not have to be the person who said it. The person who said it can just give it up at this point. They have no more to do with that. If they're not the owner, they just tossed it out there. Somebody picked it up, became the owner. You could perhaps have said one thing and said, I'm the one who said, prison reform / abolition. And you're like, and I want to own that, and I'm owning it, right? So all about it in that way. Doesn't matter. What matters now is that we have, however we got there, one person owning the shock and every person owning an issue. So one person owns the shock and an issue. Now, what next? Well, we now need to make one or more protagonists. And what do I mean by one or more, and how many? First things first, the person who owns the shock cannot have a protagonist. So the maximum number of people is the number of players minus 1, in our case 4. And you need a minimum of 1 protagonist. So 1 to 4 protagonists will be generated. And they are owned by their makers. So if you say, I want to play a protagonist, you're going to make them up, you're going to play them. Also, before you actually make them up, you assign them to an issue. So we have 1 to 4 protagonists, and we have 5 issues. And here's where things get a little bit wide open, because you can have more than 1 protagonist on a given issue. I mean, you could have all 4 protagonists pile up on one issue, or they could be spread across the 5, 4 into 4 separate ones. You will notice that every game of shock will have at least 1 issue with no protagonist. That's okay. So there's no way to anticipate. It's just however many people of all those issues lying there on the page, how many people want to play protagonists and which issues they associate them with. There's no need to negotiate. You don't have to say, oh, well, I want that one. Oh, well, you want that one? Go ahead and take it. I'll take this one over here. No need. You just say. If they pile up on one, pile up on a couple, that's fine. If they're spread out across the issues, that's fine. This is where this grid from the game comes in. And the way this grid works is, as you can see, once somebody has taken ownership of the shock, actually what happens is you write the shock down first with no owner. And then somebody says they want to be the owner, and they will write their name in there. And then people have named all the issues, and so they're all listed. It doesn't matter what order they're in vertically. And then people have claimed ownership of the issues, and so their names are written in there. And so what happens then? The people who want to play protagonists write their names in the boxes where the shock intersects with the issue. And then you write your own name right there. So, for example, we could have 4 names in one of those boxes, or the 4 names could be distributed among those 5 in any way. After the protagonists have been made, and so once you have written your name in there, then you're going to make them up. And so this is an actual person. The people who have have owns the issues and the person who has owned the shock have probably spoken up a little bit about more details about them. It's their job to frames those things more concretely. So now we sort of know, what the artificial brain is like a little bit, or we may know that, this issue of labor disputes concerns the rare earth element that is necessary for, the artificial brain or something like that. So with these known and the people who have made up their protagonists, they have done a lot. They have made up features of the protagonists. They have made up various numbers about them. They have, in particular, made up some relationships called links. And we also have gotten an idea of the 4 terms that will be governing our resolutions throughout play. I won't go into those very much right now, but they're opposed pairs. So, for example, you might have, respect versus fear, or you might have, glory versus justice or something. You could be kind of deconstructive with them. I tend not to be. I tend to be real basic. Sharing versus taking, really basic stuff. But you have those kind of those words there. So you're looking at these, and you're looking at these protagonists, these 1 to 4 protagonists in this case, and then the person to each protagonist player's left, whether they play a protagonist or not, is going to play another character or entity, the antagonist to that protagonist. So you're sitting next to the person who's going to be playing the antagonistic role while it's your protagonist's scene. That's where we get the confirmation that you saw in the diagram. Now that you have seen this organization of how it got put together, and now we can go back to that diagram where I actually laid out the roles during play. So in any given scene, 1 protagonist is tagged. You're up. Where are we? What are you doing? And the antagonist player will be narrating stuff about the antagonism minutiae that is basically making life a huge pain at the least. Meanwhile, you will notice that for that protagonist or any protagonist in that box, the shock and the issue are intertwined. We are seeing how the issue is shocked. Those are, of course, subject to the interactions between those 2 owners as they develop those ideas or those setting features in play, situational features, really, in play. So, good enough. That will resolve through some mechanics and role-playing, good old role-playing, and then it will shift to the next player who happens to be the one who just played the antagonist. If the next player doesn't have a protagonist, then it will move to the next person who does, as we keep going on the left. So that's how it goes. Protagonist after protagonist. If there's just one, then there's just one, and we just keep going with that one, and the story's all about them. That's cool. So we go around and play each protagonist, including just one, and then keep going. Okay, each time, of course, there's shifting, right? Who's the protagonist player? Who's the antagonist player?